Hi and welcome back. Hopefully your covering of your wings went well. The next thing we've got to do is look at hinging the rudder and the elevator. Now in the instructions they do talk about doing what's called a live hinge, where you can actually do that as part of the hinging as part of the covering. I'm assuming that a lot of people that are building this for the first time, they won't have done that, so I did look at that and think to myself, I wouldn't say it was an advanced way of doing it, but possibly a way that might be a bit difficult if it's the first time you've ever done any covering. So the idea is actually, as part of your covering, you actually cover over the elevator and it's all done in one hit. I'm going to do something slightly different, and I'm just pitching this at the fact that it's easier for people who have never done any covering before, never done any hinging before, and just trying to make it just slightly easier for everyone. So let's just talk through the process on the bench and give you a couple of alternatives. Okay, let's look at hinging the rudder to the fin. Now the first thing you've got to do is get it orienteered properly, and as much as this tiny little slot you've got here, this is to allow for the control horn to fit. So make sure that this is as close to this as possible. You don't want it that way, because that's going to spoil your day. So we must have the control arm this side. Now the other thing is, we don't want them butting up completely, because if they're butted up completely they will not be able to move left and right. So whatever we do, we want to do the hinging so we've got a little bit of a gap like so. Now there's a number of alternatives. If you don't fancy the challenge of trying to do it, you could use something like this. This is a medical tape called Blenderm, and we could put that on there and that would be absolutely fine. If you were really stuck, you could even use sellotape. The thing to remember is that is going to be affected by sunlight, so it's not going to be, I'd almost call it a sort of semi-permanent fixture. But if you're stuck, it's the first thing you've ever done hinging, you could get away with a sellotape. But this is one technique I've used, and that's just using this medical tape, and it's very good. I think this one's known as diamond tape, which is I'm not sure if they even make it anymore, but this is a type of tape which will work quite well. Now I'm going to do something using exactly the same covering that we've used on the fin and the rudder. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cut myself a strip which is going to be about, if we said about 15 millimeters wide, the whole length of here. And what we're going to do, the idea is we're just going to attach that, tack it either side, but it's very important to leave this gap. Now we can do one side, but the technique I'm going to show you is we'll be able to use both sides. So the first thing I'm going to do, having had some blue tack warming in my pocket to keep it nice and warm, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix the fin and the rudder in place, just using a bit of blue tack to hold it. So it means I guarantee that I'm going to keep this gap in the centre. Right, so I have the fin and the rudder just tacked down with some blue tack. I've cut myself a piece of the same covering. I've taken the back off, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay that on there like so, and that I'm just going to make sure that that is fitting down as best as possible. And I've got a little bit of a pucker there, so we're going to take that out. There we go. Now the key with this is, what we want to do is we want to try and tack all the way along here and all the way along here, but avoid the middle, because at the moment what we don't want is, if it shrinks right up, it will pull it up close like this, and what will happen is then it won't operate. So I'm just making sure I'm happy with that. I'm going to give my iron a bit of a clean. notice that what I'm actually doing is, as I'm applying the heat, I am actually just taking it away from the hinge line, like so. Now I've got it tacked in place, what I am going to do is I'm just going to remove it from the blue tack, because it just means I shall be able to move this round and get the heat on it now. So I'm quite happy with the way that's tacked. Don't worry about this at the moment, because we'll cut that off in a moment. I've got a little bit of tissue there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply this heat it just means that now it's away from the blue tack, it's easier for me to work round. Now, that's one side of the rudder hinged. I'm going to do exactly the same the other side. Now, there's a little bit of a big gap at the moment, so that all we can actually do is, when we've done the other side, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the iron just down the centre, like so, and what that will do is, if the gap is too big, we can always shrink the gap slightly, but we don't want to over shrink it, because what will happen is we'll lose our movement. So I'm now going to do exactly the same to the other side. Now edge up, and that is one rudder hinged. So the next thing we're going to do is do exactly the same on the elevator. Okay, so the next thing is going to be the elevator. The elevator is exactly the same process. If you find it a bit too daunting, remember you can use a tape to do this. Now, this is something very important to remember. The elevator has got a little slot cut in it. This is for the control horn to fit. And what we've got to remember is that on the fuselage, this is where the control wire is going to come out. So if that's sat like so, bearing in mind this is going to be sitting on top, you want this hole, the little control horn hole, on the right hand side. If you put it on the left hand side, there is no slot. So you have to have it on the right hand side to match up with the slot here. The slot in the top, that's for the rudder. But on this, at the moment, what we need is we need to just make sure that that matches up like so. So I'm just going to crack on and now join this in exactly the same way as I did before, and then we're going to go on to adding the control horns. Okay, so I'm just going to run through. I've cut that out, and the idea is I've just popped a knife in there. So what you want to do is, where possible, you want the hole for the control over the hinge line if possible. So that's how it actually goes. Let me just show you that, like so. Now, before you actually get to glue it in, little tip here, I would, this is what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to add a little bit of cyano just in this hole, and that's just to give it a bit more strength. But what I'm also going to do is, before I actually glue it back in, I'm just going to get the control rod and I'll just feed through that just to make sure, because basically what the cyano or the super glue is going to do is almost act like a bearing surface, so it just strengthens up that hole in area in that area. So I'm just going to add a wicked little bit of super glue into that hole, and then once I've done it, I'm just going to make sure that the control rod still fits through quite nicely, and then that's getting super glued into there, just like so. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the elevator. Okay, so we have successfully covered and attached the rudder, and the same with the elevator. Now obviously we've now got to glue the elevator, or sorry, the tail plane onto here like so, and then the rudder is going to sit on there. The rudder and fin is going to sit on there like so. Now my advice is, what you want to do, and this is a little bit, you can do some measurements, but this is eyeball as well. I've attached the wings to the fuselage. What I intend to do is just add a little bit of weight here, and I'm just going to get down on the bench and look this way to make sure it's square. The other thing we can do is we get a measurement, so we get our ruler, sorry, this point of reference here, I'm going to measure it from the trailing edge, that they're roughly about the same measurement. So the idea is we want to try and get these fairly close measurements. We want to look down the bench and look this way to make sure that it's all sitting square. You might find that if you've got a little bit of a roll in the fuselage, you might just have to just sand one of these slightly just to get it dead square. So I'm going to super glue this in place, and then when it's gone hard and I'm happy with it, the next thing is I'm going to add this, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So when I actually add this and it's glued, what I am going to do is again just look down the fuselage and make sure we get everything square. So there we go. I've glued the tail plane on, then I used a little set square, looked down, make sure that I've got it at 90 degrees. It's all dead square on. I'm dead chuffed with it. Look at that, look. Beautiful. Right, so couple of little tips. I just nipped a little bit of super glue on this joint. I'm not a big fan of in the instructions saying that you can just glue tape to tape. As you know, I took some of the film off the bottom of the elevator to stick it on. My advice here is I would run a small fillet of glue, cyano, leave it an hour, and then just run another one. See, that's well stuck down now, but it's good. Just remember, don't go and stick that bit. Anyway, so she's all done, she's all ready. So the next thing we're going to go on to is installing the radio control equipment and the power pod. Ooh.